What are we hearing for retaliation? CNN's Matt.
As well. He announced that. I've heard from the Foreign Ministry earlier on this evening that it's in the middle of the night at the moment, so they're not saying anything. Now, whether that means he's going to hold back. What we are hearing from a source in Washington, though, is that there have already been some. One of them is the closure to US or foreign citizens, US and Canadian and British citizens, of the Anglo-American school, which is the main expatriate school here in Moscow. I've got lots of friends who send their kids there. It'd be a kind of a sideswipe. I've spoken to the principal tonight. He says he can't confirm it at the moment. He's waiting for further details about what exactly the situation is. But if it turns out to be the case, then that would be a real sideswipe to the diplomatic community here, particularly from the United States, many of whom, who are family people, send their children to a school like that. And so that could be something that will be clarified in the morning.
Enormously disruptive for families. I remember when the Magnitsky Act was passed here, Anti-Corruption Act, Russia suspended adoptions by Americans. So a tactic that's been used before. Matthew Chance in Moscow, thanks very much. Perspective now from CNN national security analyst Julia Kayyem. She's former assistant secretary at the Department of Homeland Security. Also Stephen Hall, he's a 30-year veteran of Russian operations at the CIA, author of a recent piece for the Washington Post titled "Why the CIA Won't Go Public with Evidence of Russia's Hacking." And we also have CNN's former Moscow bureau chief Jill Doherty. She's now a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center here in Washington. Stephen, if I could start with you, your reaction to the actions announced today. When we spoke, intelligence findings could be costly access that you have inside Russian systems, so there's only so much, isn't there, that you can lift the veil?
Yes, this seems to be the first step that the administration is taking now to respond to the Russian hacks. It seems to be starting to sort of break down into three different categories. The sanctions against the FSB, which is one of the civilian intelligence services, and then the GRU, one of the military intelligence services, seems to be largely, I would say, can happen to our diplomats in Moscow. So I think what you're seeing is the first stage of this now.
And that has cost, does it not? Because, I mean, we're talking about Russian diplomats leaving here, but really the understanding is that they're intelligence operatives. And in any country like this, it is understood that there are spies on the ground, some declared, some not declared. And of course, the U.S. has spies on the ground if we want to call them that in Russia, assuming that they are sent packing as well.
Russia, I'm not really much of a liberty to American diplomats in Moscow will have an effect on the mission of both of those.
Help us understand Vladimir Putin's he has said, his spokesman has said, there is no alternative to reciprocal measures, but he also has what he presumes to be, I imagine, a friendlier U.S. president coming in. Does he temper his responses now, knowing that he will have a new man in charge here in a few weeks' time?
I think he's looking at his watch and saying, we've got 3 weeks, so we might as well let it all hang out. I mean, you look at what they're doing. That step with the Anglo-American school is kind of a personal, tawdry step by the Russians to get back at what they perceive are tawdry steps probably by the Americans. But I think Putin will probably look at this very seriously, look at things that he can do in a very strict, let's say, cyber way. He will do things that are symbolic and personal, and then he will do other things that would have to do with intelligence. So I think it will be multi-level, and they keep saying saying it's going to be tit for tat. So if there are some things that will not be revealed that the Obama administration will be taking, there will be things that will be not revealed by the Russians as well. But Jim, I can tell you, the level of personal comments is amazing. On social media, the comments about Obama coming from the Russian administration are really unbelievable. You know, calling them losers, that this administration isn't really an administration, they're just a bunch of losers. That tweet coming from the Russian embassy in England, in London, the lame duck, an actual picture of a duck. It's pretty personal.
No question. We've heard some of that in our own politics here in the U.S. Juliet, you were on the White House call earlier, gave some more details on this response. You say that the White House made it clear this was a reaction not just to the hacking, though perhaps primarily, but also tied to, as well, Russia's conduct towards U.S. diplomats on the ground in Russia.
Yeah, sort of a less reported story over the last couple months, and Jill has certainly talked about it before, is just the, I would say, antagonism, harassment, sometimes even physical, of U.S. personnel in Russia. So the White House was clear that while, you know, we're all focused on cyber, this actually is bigger than the cyber attack, that these sanctions. And I think they wanted to make it clear for two reasons. One is there's no wiggle room in the intelligence community's assessments today. I just want to make that clear. There's no sort of outlier intelligence agency like we saw with the FBI perhaps earlier. The second is that because the executive order can only be rescinded by a president, it will require Trump, if he chooses to do so, to essentially go against his entire intelligence community. He can certainly do that, but it would take some explanation vis-a-vis his intelligence community, the one that he will be governing in the future. And so it's just important to note that that the executive order is not solely related to Russia. It could apply to the Chinese or the North Koreans if they try to do this.
To stand up against his entire intelligence. And it is only Trump and Putin. Later, a new ceasefire taking effect tonight in Syria. The real question, though, can this one hold? We've got a live report from inside the region.
Where will the lead take us today? Straight to the source.
Would Israel be willing to go along with those demands?
To a side you haven't seen.
That smells a young man's game.
All the way to the heart of a problem.
What is going on in Ferguson, Missouri, in downtown America?
Maybe all the way to the president.
Do you think you were naive back then?
The Lead with Jake Tapper. Weekdays at 4.
Every day we do stories about people in need. With CNN's Impact Your World, you can help. When you go to the Impact Your World section at CNN.com, you'll find more on the stories that move you. Plus, you can find out just what you can do to help. Links to reputable charities and organizations. Find out more on New Day and go to CNN.com/impact. Be the change. Take action. Make an impact.
We're talking tonight about U.S. retaliation against Russia for hacking and tampering with the recent election. Sanctions that the White House says may not be the only steps taken. We're also talking about leading Republican lawmakers endorsing the measures, some even calling them not tough enough. And Donald Trump's considerable reluctance at the same time to call this what all 16 U.S. intelligence agencies say was a Russian cyber attack. Back now with the panel. Juliet, I just want to, for the sake of our audience, jettison the spin here. You will hear from Donald Trump and from some in his camp expressing doubts about this, saying where are the facts, saying that this is a Democratic spin here. But let's be honest, it's the intelligence agencies. I had Republican Senators McCain and Graham on early this week saying the entire Senate disagrees with Trump and believes that Russia is behind this attack. You had today the Senate Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell say that Russia was behind the attack. You had the Republican Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, say that Russia was behind the attack. Russia's Donald Trump standing firm today, saying he will meet with his intelligence leaders, but we all got to move on. Have you ever seen anything like this in your experience, where the president defies lawmakers and intelligence agencies on an issue of national security?
I have not, and it's so unprecedented and actually quite dangerous. You just simply don't want a president-elect, whether a Democrat or Republican, coming in at war with his or her intelligence agencies. It is a dangerous place to start because, well, for two reasons. One is you want them to support you and the administration and the protection and safety and security of the United States. But what the Trump administration or the president-elect is doing is he's making it about himself. It's really not about him. It's about the United States and our interest in the future. At some stage relatively soon, President Trump will have to either tell our allies or our that we are going to do something, a war, bombing, whatever, sanctions, whatever, are the tools that he'll be able to use based on the intelligence that he intelligence agencies. And those countries will probably have less confidence in those intelligence agencies and now has to think bigger than himself.
Joy doesn't even begin to capture the glee that President Putin feels about what is going on. I mean, he just can sit back and smoke a cigar and not do anything, and just watch the United States churning in all of this, knowing that he can now criticize President Obama. He doesn't even have to criticize him directly because this kind of echo chamber of propaganda, et cetera, is swirling around. So he can just kind of watch it all happen. But President Putin, I think that he has the measure of incoming President Trump. I don't, just to really, stick it to President gives him a lot of pleasure.
Stephen, I have to ask you, as someone with the CIA, how are agents and analysts within the agency reacting to this? How do they receive this, this dismissal of their work, of their assessment, some of it attained, I imagine, at great danger? How do they react to this?
I think shock is probably a good way to start. Unprecedented is also a good way to what is happening. I can speak from inside of CIA, the Directorate of Operations. Why is it important? It's important because the most senior levels of government, the president, senior people in the executive branch, need this unique intelligence that they collect. And to have the president-elect come in and say, well, essentially, not only on the agencies and the organizations that they work for, but on the very intelligence which they work so hard and put themselves in the